breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all. Lynne Scott Haggerman bringing the fire. Words that ignite hearts burning higher. Faith and power, no chains can bind. Step into the light, leave fear behind.
Hello, everybody. It's Lynne Scott Haggerman. Thank you so much for coming to my podcast today. It's such an honor that you have decided to spend your time on my show and listening to myself and my amazing guests that I'll bring on shortly. Before I get started, I want to continue to thank Patriots Prayer Network and and Eddie, who has set up that amazing music for me and is helping me every step of the way do my show. I think this is number 7 live show of my entire life, which goes to show you how amazing our God is that we serve. Before I get started, I'd like to take just a minute or two and share about my background since I'm new to the Patriots Prayer Network, so you get to know me too. First, let me tell you who I am today. I'm an international human resource consultant, award-winning. I'm also an independent LifeWave distributor. LifeWave is the wearable med bed that is at Live Younger with Lynne, LYNNE.com. I also am a marathoner and a weightlifter, a child of God, a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, and a friend to Holy Spirit. And let me tell you about who I was, what used to happen to me when I was little. I was trafficked from the time I was born until I was 5 years old. Simultaneously, I was taken to a U.S. University medical center in the United States where they experiment on children. They did then, they still do. Several universities actually in the United States and worldwide. I am here to be a voice for the voiceless. I was activated by the Lord God Almighty himself last year to speak for those who don't have a voice, the many children I saw who did not make it, the little girl in me who survived and helped others survive, and the many children who need help today. And my ministry area for that, my website is Q, the letter Q, the word grit, GRIT.org. Q stands for quantum because God's going after this in a big way. And I have websites listed in the ticker underneath the screen. So God bless you all for being here. And I want to welcome to the stage Dr. Josiah. Okay, let me see if I can get him on. Oh my goodness. So we're going to get technology. You're here, but let me get us on together. There we go. Well, hang on. This will happen. Hi. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. It is so nice to meet you. So I'm going to be, I have a couple of buttons down here. I'm going to, that I didn't think I was going to have to touch, but I did. And there you go. We're live. I'm learning. You know, I have to say to my audience, I used to be a recovering perfectionist, and now I am not. So welcome so much, Dr. Baker. Thank you for being on my show today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I want to take a minute to introduce my audience to you, and then I want to get into your book. So I'm going to read from a bio to my audience. I'm so honored to welcome Dr. Josiah Baker. He is a Christ-centered economist and a global thinker who's lived in 7 countries and spends a lot of his time in other countries, even to this day. He's taught around the world. He's the co-author of Religion, Politics, and Polarization, what the topic of today, which reveals how faith is shaping political decisions in Congress. In addition, he is a co-author of The Optimist, a beautiful case for God's existence and the inherent goodness of humanity. Today on this podcast, Dr. Baker is going to help us unpack the spiritual dynamics behind America's political divide, and he offers hope for healing through truth and belief. What an amazing background you have.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun teaching all these years, traveling around and writing a few books. And this is the first book here, and
Okay.
this is has to do with the affiliation between religion and voting, and particularly for certain issues such as welfare spending, defense spending, taxes, abortion, and that's religion, politics, and polarization. It really underscores the culture war that we've had, and that's been going on for a while now, and where there really are two Americas. You have the America that is traditionalist, an America that is uh, still follows a lot of the original principles of the country, and then you have the progressive America, which uh, and so you have, and generally, uh, progressive America you'll find in the urban areas. I think out of the top 25 cities in the United States, 23 of them have Democratic mayors, for example. And
That's astounding. And
yeah,
hasn't it been that way for many, many, many years in those major cities?
um, well, it's just gotten more that way.
Okay.
Most people don't know this, but historically, New York City's had more Republican mayors than Democrat mayors, for example. Uh, Chicago has had Democrat mayors since the 1920s. So in that case, yeah, if you look at Chicago, uh, it was more of a mix in the past. Today, there are a few examples. Dallas's mayor was a Democrat. He switched parties, I think, last year. Fort Worth has a Republican mayor, and Jacksonville, Florida, has a Republican mayor. But other than those three cities, the top 25, the rest of them are Democrats. If you go to the top 50, it's still something like 44 out of 50. So you have these urban areas where progressive politics dominate, and then you have the suburban and rural areas, of course, where traditional America still dominates. So if you ever get a map, a presidential election map that color codes the country county by county,
Yeah.
showing red for Republican and blue for Democrat, you would see a sea of red across the United States with pockets of blue. So even in states like California and New York State, if you actually break it down county by county and square miles, I think close to half of California would actually be Republican territory, square mileage speaking.
I have seen that map on social media, Dr. Baker,
Mhm,
and I
mhm.
remember being shocked the first time I saw it with my own two eyes, because that's not what we're being told. We the people are being told as if practically the entire country is not
Mhm.
conservative.
Well, that's because uh, media, entertainment, and higher education is overwhelmingly controlled by progressive politics. So the people that are disseminating the information and controlling it uh, operate from a similar mindset. So, I mean, you could look at the headlines of the top 15 newspapers online, and you're going to see very similar headlines. You're going to see similar phrases if you skip from one podcast to the other that are under traditional legacy media. So they're operating from the same perspective and increasingly almost using the same words. And it's a frightening situation in the sense that I think there's a term called groupthink. Groupthink is
Yes.
where, yeah, people end up thinking like everybody else and conforming to everybody else. Some of that's subconscious, some of that is deliberate, and so we've seen more and more groupthink um, among communication and media elements. There's not as much diversity in thought and opinion as in the past.
So with the media and entertainment and the higher education all saying the same talking points, it's almost like they get together every morning and decide, and I'm talking mainstream media now, and decide what the narrative's going to be for the day. I'm not sure if you've heard of Operation Mockingbird before, where the Obama did a law in allowing mainstream media to give us propaganda, and so I'm not sure. It's just interesting that they have all these same talking points.
Um, some of it is by design, some of it isn't. It's more serendipitous in the sense that the comedian George Carlin, not exactly somebody maybe some of your audience would listen to, but the late comedian George Carlin said that you don't have to have a conspiracy for a conspiracy to happen when everybody comes from the same place or same point of view.
Good
When you
point.
go to the same universities, have the same professors, when you operate in the same circles and you have the same social and economic and political interests, people, they mentally align and they do things without having to call each other up or text each other and say, let's do it. They recognize what's good for them. And I would argue they're part of the same community of a sort. So the people in Boston or Philadelphia, the large northeastern cities, and they, in fact, one could argue if we look at the large cities, let's say people in Boston might have more in common with people in San Francisco than they would with people in Western Massachusetts.
Yes. Yes.
Because they come from a similar mental orientation, have a similar set of values. They really see America very differently. And I think this is something that conservatives or traditionalists don't often understand, is that the left of center interpretation of American democracy is an ever progressing, evolving place. In other words, there is no real end to expanding the agenda. All right. And in contrast, a lot of conservatives and traditionalists believe that everything was right from the beginning, or that they're content with the way things tend to be. In other words, from a progressive perspective, you go back to President Wilson and and Franklin D. Roosevelt and then Lyndon Johnson. With each significant progressive president, you're going to expand the role of government, expand what the vision of what a progressive democracy is, and that this will continue. And there's no end to this. And which ultimately what happens when you expand government continually is government ends up micromanaging people, with what's called a totalitarian regime. And inevitably you end up with some kind of centralized control that is, if they don't call it communism, it's close to it.
And that appears where we have been heading. A lot of where we're at today is totalitarianism. I look at the major companies that all fall in line with government agendas, it appears. And it's like a dictatorship too, to some extent. And when you said that there's the people who are center left, that there's no end to their expanding agenda, where do you see that going in the United States if we, the people, don't stop it?
Well, because there's no saturation point. There's no point where everybody has the rights that they need. There's no points where the work is done. In fact, I would argue that the zeitgeist or the inspiration of much progressive politics is the process itself. They want to continually push because they like pushing. But in the end, if they get what you want, you get like a social credit system, like in China, where everybody gets monitored and every word they say and every act they do can be recorded and really micromanaged. And some of this, I think, is also connected to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
That, yeah, as society has become more materialistically successful, people look more towards post-material goals, and people get really worried about things that they historically would think would be laughable. And so this is where, political correctness language kicks in, that people can act like saying the wrong word is the equivalent of committing a violent act, and which would be preposterous many years ago. But it's because when you live in a reality where violence doesn't really happen, or where a lot of the material needs are already met, you start looking for problems. Small problems become big problems. Reminds me of, sometimes married couples are together for a long time, and the fights that they'll have will actually seem to be pretty trivial. They'll fight over pizza toppings. It's kind of like that. But with the progressive left, I think the real problem is that in general, they want other people to live under their rules. And so when you get that kind of monitoring and scrutinization, if they want a secular humanist society, then ultimately they would not want people to be religious in a traditional way. They want to, and that's the great danger, is there is this progressive element of wanting to continue to limit and control people. So a lot of libertarians especially understand that, which is why you do find people from the left breaking off into libertarian areas. But I think it's kind of imagined like a homeowners association that's being run by people who that focus on the most minor infractions, and they live for that. That type of mentality is the risk that we have when we look at future governance in the United States. Is just more and more rules and more ways to control people, because they want to control people, they being the people that are creating these rules. They're not creating rules to let people live as they like. They're creating rules to tell people how to live. And in Europe, it's particularly, let's say in the last 15, 20 years, the European Union is just, that's part of the reason why the UK pushed back and why there've been a lot of problems within Europe, is you get this group of elites that think they know better. So they want to control. Yeah.
It is the elites then that are behind this, because I would say everyday Joes, which I believe are most of our audience, would never think to try to control other people like this. It's very, in the United States, it's very un-American.
Yeah.
So I would think that only the elites, who, like you said, are very comfortable, would want to start controlling other people that they likely think are less than them. I know we've been called like useless eaters and all kinds of names. And when you go over to Europe, I just get so appalled daily on social media. I'm seeing these just everyday Joes say something on social media, and they're in prison for years, where murderers and all kinds of other offenders are let out to walk free. It's the craziest thing to watch.
Yeah, I think the countries that come to mind would be particularly Scotland, which is part of the United Kingdom. But Scotland has very, very strict rules, and England as well. I don't think I have the time to go over how the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland's operate, but basically you have a few countries, 4 countries that are in one, sort of. But yeah, England and Scotland are particularly bad. Germany, of course, has gotten some quite a bit of attention, where people have been fined and arrested for using the wrong words, whereas there are people, particularly immigrants, that will commit violent acts and often face very little consequence. Those countries are particularly difficult. Not all of Europe. Eastern part of Europe, of course, is a little different. but they have the Soviet/communist legacy, and they know people, anybody over 50 in Eastern Europe vividly remembers what it was like to have a communist government. So it's not all of Europe, but definitely a lot of Western Europe. You have these problems, and which are they suffer from a similar situation with some parts of the U.S. And I know it's frustrating and it's upsetting that the most educated people in our country and a lot of these other countries, they've lost the value of freedom. They really don't want freedom of the individual. They want control. And some of this, I think, really is a result of the post 9/11. 9/11 brought us, if we look at it from the American legal perspective, 9/11 gave us, the Patriot Act and Homeland Security, and now we have the Real ID, and we have all these other measures. We have different types of capital controls. We control the movement of money and track the movement of money. And there was something called the FACTA Act in 2010, that if you have any bank account outside the United States, you have to declare it. Any property outside the United States, you're supposed to declare it. All of this as a way of controlling things, supposedly mainly to enhance our national security. But, all of our emails and text messages are being stored and tracked, supposedly. The government, numerous agencies have been doing this for a long time. And it all happened, or the origins of it, very much go back to how the country reacted due to the events of September 11th, 2001. And and some of this has never really been addressed in court. The United States government has continued to do stuff that would very much go against what the founding fathers would have wanted in terms of freedom. Now, I think to be fair, we try to put a little balance into this. Technology and transportation has allowed enemies of the United States to do a lot of things. So something had to be done. And so what I'm trying to say is some of this may have been more of a reaction to try to control something, and without realizing that a lot of liberties are overstepped. And also there are some people who may not really care and just want power.
I think about the state of Colorado, and I'm not sure the status of the bill, but they had a bill that was flying through their legislative body where if parents said the wrong pronouns, that they could have their children taken away from them. And that's in the United States of America.
Yeah.
So it's infiltrating throughout all of our systems.
Well, some of this stuff has been around a long time. The states have the ability to take children away from parents for decades. They do this in different ways. That's just what you explained as a very, I've not heard of it, but it doesn't surprise me that some localities would try to do would have a rule that could result in that. There's this idea the state knows better. A lot of these things happen and we don't even question it. I mean, for example, in divorce courts, child custody is determined by a judge every day. And when people have children and are divorced and they want to move to a different state, they often can't because the state controls the child. And unless you're divorced or unless you have kids or you want to move, a lot of people don't know that. There's all kinds of ways the state has power. It's almost like the state just simply allows parents to take care of children until the moment the state decides that they shouldn't, and then they can take the children. But we go back to why did this happen? Well, because there were some people who had really terrible parents. So we empower the state to allow, the state has been empowered to minimize parental authority because there's a risk of them treating all parents as if they're all bad. And it's a real hard balance, but things like pronouns and Yeah, these are minor things compared to like severe physical abuse and issues that gave the state those kinds of powers decades ago.
With your research and the book that you created, since we're on the topic of the children, which is very near and dear to my heart, the systems that are in place, the child protective services, did you do any deep dive researches into those institutions and how they are likely doing more harm than good?
Well, I'm very familiar with a couple books on that. My books don't, my writings don't reflect that. But I there's a book that I read called "Taken into Custody" by Stephen Baskerville. Baskerville taught at Howard University in Washington, D.C. for a long time. He was based out of Washington, D.C. But in that book, he explains how the family courts take children away from people. And again, a lot of the origins of this is there really are a certain percentage of parents really are horrible. Just like any group of people, you're going to find a certain percent. Years ago, I was a professor at the University of Central Florida. I probably had 1,200, sometimes even more students a semester. I taught very large classes. Every semester, if I had 1,000 students or so, I'd have a crazy student. Okay, every semester.
Yeah.
Because 1 out of 1,000 people is going to have some kind of serious mental illness at any given time. And, so you're going to have people that become parents that are terrible people because of the problems they have. You're never going to have a situation where all parents are going to be responsible. So a lot of what we're seeing is the state stepping in, trying to do something about it. But sometimes it's like trying to kill a mosquito with a shotgun.
Yes. Oh, that's excellent. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to calibrate the appropriate response, and it's also hard to sort out between what gradation of grievance. I mean, okay, in Florida, for example, I had a female student who showed up late. This was a long time ago now, that they just passed the rules. She got a $500 ticket. She was crying when she showed up at my class because she had a baby, and her baby was asleep in the car, and there was a bank, and she got out of her car to walk up to the ATM to pull money out so she could pay the babysitter. There was a police officer that pulled up right behind and saw her leave the baby in the car. And even though she was standing directly in front of the car using the ATM machine, she was still given a $500 ticket for leaving a child in a car.
Wow.
Because technically that was breaking the law at that time. I don't know if they've changed the statute or not. Because the law would be written, you cannot leave a child in the car. So the moment you step out of a car and close the door, you've broken the law. Okay, because a lot of times it's lazy legislation is what they write legislation simplistically or in a very broad way, and then later lawsuits shake it out and make it more precise. But we have a lot. But a lot of so it's not so much conspiratorial as just, again, it's just bad. It's bad legislation, and it's cops taking the letter of the law to the point that you're 5 feet away from your baby in a car. She didn't get the baby out of the car because the baby's asleep. Anybody who's ever had a sleeping baby in a car knows what it means to wake up a baby.
Right.
And they really don't want to do that.
Right.
But she had to pay her babysitter. So in order for her to comply with the law, she would have had to take the kid out of the car, wake the kid up while she used the ATM machine with a screaming baby in her arms or whatever. So, but it doesn't matter. That makes her an abusive mother, right? I mean, that's, and then worse than that, and that's what she was more upset about when she came to me, because she was late for her test. It was a test day.
Yeah.
But what really upset her more, she didn't have a lot of money. $500 fine was hard, but it was the fact that she was being labeled as a bad mother really hurt her feelings. And it goes down on a record, if she ever had any future and the future legal issues or whatever, it would come up. Oh, you got a $500 fine for abandoning your child in a hot car.
which sounds awful. When you talk about the legislation, so my day job, I'm an international human resource consultant,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not an attorney, but I function like one all the time because I'm constantly to resolve. I get contacted when there are serious problems going on in companies
Mm-hmm.
in their human resource area. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
constantly researching the law. And what you said is very true in all fields because the laws are vague. And then we have the three-letter agencies that start interpreting, well, this is what the legislators meant. And
Mm-hmm.
then in turn, the three-letter agencies start becoming the legislator. So they're writing things called rules and guidelines and acting as if they were law and fining companies and fining people whenever it's the law is so gray,
Yeah.
who knows if that is the law? And like you said, then people go to court. But our court system, I'm calling it the injustice system now,
Mm-hmm.
because then you have, one person, unless you have a jury trial, which are not that many. So then you have one person trying to decide and interpret the law, which is how our judicial system is supposed to be. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, they're actually determining and interpreting rules and regulations made up by three-letter agencies. I was grateful when the
Mm-hmm.
Chevron decision was made at SCOTUS at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
But it does make things like what you're describing very, it's not uncommon in the United States for just ridiculous rulings to be made and harming everyday people.
Well, it's the root of it has to do with the power of judicial review, and or as I sometimes call it, make believe, use your imagination, justice. Uh, it's
I
it,
like
it
that.
yeah. I mean, it if you're smart enough and clever enough, you can find some kind of precedent somewhere and extrapolate that. Roe v. Wade, which was finally knocked down, was based off of some really sloppy use your imagination
Yes,
legislation. Even people who are very pro-choice, if they're honest with themselves, understand that. And it's I think the problem with adhering to the law cuts in many ways. There are police officers that I've known that I've talked to them about things like this, and they'll say, well, if we don't follow the letter of the law, we can be sued for not following the letter of the law. Because people sue cops. So everyone's afraid of being sued. So
yes,
you go to the most fundamental interpretation of the law to prevent that. And that's so you not only have bad legislation, you have the people that are enforcing the rules feel constrained to follow them to the letter because of that. Because you don't have enough judges out there that will say this is a stupid lawsuit. And then furthermore, they don't punish lawyers for bringing up bad lawsuits because they play golf together. That's why there's a lot
yes,
of camaraderie between the lawyers and the judges. The judges used to be lawyers, and so it's a very incestuous situation. But going back to HR, I'm old enough to remember when HR really wasn't HR; it was personnel, and HR over the last 30, 40 years has really evolved into for many employees a very terrifying part of their employment.
I know. I am constantly saying, Dr. Baker, let's put the human back in human resources. I hear that all the time. That
Mhm.
yeah, that they are terrorizing employees when they're supposed to be an advocate for the employees and an advocate for management. Um,
Mhm.
but they don't appear to be, especially in major corporations. But I think that's also part of that totalitarianism system.
Well, you say the wrong word to some HR people and some corporations, and you're done.
Yes.
And originally, HR used to be personnel. Personnel was created by management to do the bidding of management, but because of litigation concerns and other things, increasingly management does the bidding of HR.
Yes, and what I have found, this is where I come into play too. So I'll just address the different major business owners and HR people out there. In my field, I have found that so many human resource people will threaten management with, if you don't do this, there's going to be a lawsuit. If you don't do this, there's going to be a lawsuit. And I find that that comes from very low self-esteem of human resource professionals because they don't have a seat at the table. That's a common phrase in my field. We want a seat at the table. We want to be seen as important as to be as important as an operations manager, when that's not the case. Human resources is supposed to be support to the operations managers. They're the ones making the money for the company. They're the ones keeping the company afloat. They're the ones who are paying the salaries of the employees. Human resources is supposed to support management. And management companies, owners, they have liability everywhere. I mean, business is one big liability. In every aspect of business, there's liability. So management manages liability, and there's a lot more liability in places other than human resources. Frankly, the amount of lawsuits compared to lawsuits in other areas of liability is small. And that's what I see. That is why I have so many owners of major corporations reaching out to me and saying, Lynn, my human resource department says this, but I don't trust them. So you tell me and I use common sense, and I'll say, what is your level of risk? And some of my clients have no risk, and they're like, I can't tolerate risk. I want to make sure it's perfect. And some say we have in-house legal counsel, push the envelope, and everywhere in between. And to me, business owners in the United States can run their businesses the way they want while staying in the parameters of the law, but so much is gray that I like to give owners options. Here are all the options that are available. It's your business. You decide what to do. I'm a consultant, and let them decide their liability, as opposed to dictator human resource departments threatening with, you'll have a lawsuit if you don't. And I encourage managers and owners to say, show me the lawsuits, put the facts where your mouth is. Show me how I'm going to be sued. You show me all these lawsuits. And then I encourage them to compare that to other areas of liability in their company. I think this is the way that we, the people, break out of these systems that we're in that don't serve we, the people. They don't serve the people at all.
Well, when it comes to understanding legalities, and this is one of the great things about America, actually. We have state level governance and we have federal level governance. And what I love about America is that if you get bad ideas or good ideas, you can try them out in different states often before it takes over the whole country.
Yes.
And some states will get terrible ideas. They'll implement them at the state level, and then it doesn't work very well, and everyone sees it's a bad idea, and then they don't do it. And countries like Scotland or England within the UK and a lot of these other countries, they have more centralized forms of government. So when a bad idea happens, it takes over the whole country. But when it comes to, you're talking about HR rules and regulations, there are variations between the states. For example, between Missouri and California, there's huge.
Radically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Side note, I don't practice in California. I'm just saying because it's just the laws are so intense and extreme, and I'm surprised businesses can do business in California. I have to say that they do have strong liability and litigation risk in that state because of the myriad of laws. I don't see how people stay in business. I just don't.
Well, they're leaving. The In-N-Out Burger headquarters is moving to Tennessee. That was announced about 10 days ago. The family that owns In-N-Out Burger chain is leaving. A lot of companies have left, and they continue to leave. And but that's to me, I see that as a very a very good thing about America, and that and I would not want a country to necessarily have it where one state has so much power over all the others. And so, the problem But if you're looking at litigation, you have the state level, then you have the federal level, and within the federal level, you have different districts, and some districts are more ideologically one way or the other, and so you even have some competition at the federal level between the different districts. But one of but getting back to my book, Religion, Politics, and Polarization here, this book explains why we have such huge differences in interpreting defense spending and welfare spending and taxes. Why are taxes? I mean, if you live in California and you're a high income person, you're going to pay an enormous amount of taxes of your marginal income, over 50% if you add up if you're in a top bracket. And so that kind of variation underscores the differences in the United States. And we're undergoing a conflict and between which direction we want to go as a country. And if as long as we have a situation where the states have enough power to where they don't have to conform to the federal government as much, you're going to have this internal competition. I think the big threat would be if the federal government became so powerful that states basically didn't have much autonomy. And then even if you had a federal government that had great ideas and great people, inevitably you get bad ideas and inevitably you get bad people. So there's no country in the history of the world that's never had a bad leader. You're going to get a bad leader sooner or later. Every organization, churches, businesses, sooner or later, you're going to get someone who has bad ideas and they're a bad leader. And what are you going to do when that happens? And so by dividing the power up, by having powerful states' rights with a federal government that has different districts, that lessens the negative impact of having bad ideas and bad leaders.
Is that the direction then that you see the nation going, Dr. Baker? Because under President Trump's administration, I'm watching him, for example, the Department of Education. Whenever they have a lot of power with what is taught to our little ones. And most of what's being taught to our little ones is ridiculous. What's the percentage of illiteracy now in the United States? The dumbing down is horrific. And the reading, writing, and arithmetic seems to be something that the federal Department of Education doesn't believe in. I have seen President Trump eliminate the funding, put the loans, put the college loans in with the SBA, the Small Business Administration. So I've watched him dismantle it. I've watched him defunding and take power away, which should be going to the states. Do you see that as being successful and continuing to be moving forward? And do you see that in all areas of the federal government starting to push more down to the states?
Well, it's been very well publicized what they're doing with the U.S. Department of Education. And I think that one could interpret the Trump administration as, they were doing an ongoing effort to try to correct a lot of these things. Are they successful? There's a lot of fighting in courts right now. I think, it took us almost arguably since President Wilson over 100 years to get to this point. To expect to correct everything overnight or in a matter of months is difficult, if not impossible. So I think that we have a situation where this could be an era of reform, but it has to be ongoing. And if the country doesn't reform, then you end up with a lot of problems. It's too early in the administration to discern the effectiveness of it. There was years ago when Reagan came in, there was a lot of talk of Reagan was going to change everything, the Reagan Revolution, and there were some things that changed. But when you look at the growth of government and what happened during the 1980s, a lot more of it was rhetoric than actual retrenchment. So But yeah, it looks like that there's a lot of efforts to try to make government more efficient, and hopefully that will work. I don't expect them to. I do not expect them to be able to accomplish everything in just a couple of years. I think it will take many years. I do not think that Trump has enough time. So it will take whoever is president after Trump, and maybe even one more, to try to realign things. And I also think that a lot of people who were in the U.S. Department of Education really had good intentions. There are a lot of people in the government who think they're doing the right thing. It's just, when I think of getting back to education, because as a professor, that's on my mind a lot. Back in the mid 90s, when I was first starting out teaching, we had 1 or 2 page syllabi. A syllabus would be 1 or 2 pages. And then you add this and add that, and before you know it, 20 years later, you have a 15 or 20 page syllabus. And a lot of it's just regulatory stuff that nobody cares about except for the regulators. And if anyone's been to college in the last 10 or 15 years, you get a college syllabus. A lot of them will say student learning objectives. Well, I've never had a student, and I've probably had 30,000 students in my career, maybe more. I've never, ever had a student who cared about student learning objectives, ever. It's just a waste of space on a syllabus.
Right.
And, it's all about compliance and checking these boxes. And as an economist, I find that infuriating, because there's so much inefficiency involved. But yeah,
What do you think, Dr. Baker, of Doge and AI? So they're saying that Doge is going to use AI to go through our federal government to increase efficiencies, and they expect to be able to eliminate federal regulations by 50%.
Well, they mean well, and in some of the regulations, some of these efforts are going to help. But so the challenge is this: if you cut too indiscriminately, you make mistakes. If you take too much time to make the cuts, for example, if you tell the State Department over the next year we're going to review what programs should be cut, you give everybody enough time to justify their existence. So therefore, almost nothing can ever get done if you take too much time.
Right.
So Doge is going to make mistakes. Doge has already arguably made some mistakes, but it's how else are you going to get this done? We've tried for decades to make government more efficient. A lot of people have, and it hasn't worked out very well. The percentage of government spending in relation to the percentage of the overall economy it still climbs. The government overall debt is still climbing. This big, beautiful bill, a lot of people like parts of it, but it's a huge bill, and it will probably almost certainly add trillions to our debt. And that's an area where I agree with Rand Paul. There are some serious spending problems that we have, and we have not found a way to control it. And Doge cutting millions here and there, and millions are okay, billions are better, but we've got a $35 trillion problem. And to put this in perspective, when 9/11 happened, we owed $1.5 trillion basically. So 24 years later, not quite 24 years later, we've gone from $1.5 trillion to $35 trillion. That's a problem. That's an unsustainable trajectory.
What do you think about the tariffs? As opposed to the debt, and using that to work off the debt?
Well, that's kind of so there is this, that's part of a bigger argument or bigger discussion that the economy could grow faster, and by growing faster could generate more tax revenue that would close in on the debt. And if we could get our economy to grow at 4% a year, for example, that would earn enormous amounts of tax revenue. So you can kind of grow your way out of the ditch. The tariffs. So this is an old topic, because you have the theory of tariffs and then you have the reality of tariffs. So a lot of people in the United States do not realize that other countries do not really practice free trade. They discriminate in many different ways. They don't follow the letter of the agreements that they have. There's a lot of ways that American products are discriminated against, and they favor their own products. And a lot of these it's done in enforcement or lack of enforcement. It's done in how the regulations are worded, rather than saying what the percentage of the tariff is going to be. So I think in general, yeah, a lot of these tariff negotiations are going to work well for America. Yeah. It will address some grievances that we've had. But the bigger problem we have is we really do have to find ways to create more jobs in the United States. And we have to encourage people not to to encourage Americans to invest in America, but also Americans and others outside of the United States to want to invest their money in America. So that's the real challenge.
Simultaneously, we're hearing President Trump talk about another benefit of the tariffs is for those U.S. citizens making $150,000 a year or less, their income tax would be eliminated.
Yeah, I'm not entirely keen on that. I think I actually believe everyone should pay some income tax, no matter what their income is, like a 1% rate. I want people to have skin in the game. I want people to feel like they're contributing money to the government, because it will make them be more aware of that. The idea of right now, half the population pays no federal income tax. So they don't really have any skin in the game. They tend to view the government as something that gives them something.
Half the population doesn't pay income tax?
Probably more than that. Probably half the people who file taxes don't pay any federal income tax. Yeah.
How does that even happen?
Because of the exemptions, the standardized exemptions. They don't make enough.
Wow.
There's other credits.
Lower income. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of people who don't even have to file for various reasons. So, no, I actually think that, and not that many people have this point of view, but I think that it's important that everybody pays a minimal amount.
Well,
regardless. Yeah.
When I hear that, so this is like shocking to me. When I hear that half of the United States population doesn't pay income taxes, that means that the other half of us are footing our bills, and half of the United States also, which is completely unfair. Mm-hmm. So there is some fixing that needs to be done there. I had also been hearing about doing different taxation models on goods, for example, to eliminate or reduce the internal income tax in favor for what's being termed external income tax by tariffs, for example. I think you're frozen, Dr. Baker. So I'll just keep talking. I'm sure Dr. Baker will come back on. Either that, or he's in for the radio audience, he's either in an extremely thoughtful pose from my question, or his internet has been frozen. So while we wait for his internet to unfreeze on his end, it's just interesting. The last show I did, my guest had a similar problem. Oh, and he's gone. So we'll see if he comes back on. I have anyway probably 6 minutes left to the show. So while we're waiting for that 6 minutes, I'll do a bit of a station break and let you know again about my websites. So one of my websites is Q, the letter Q in the word grit, GRIT.org. Q stands for quantum. That is my website to help traffic children and adults and anyone with any type of trauma. It was information that God gave to me for a few years that I would just write down while I was still in deep healing. And before I started speaking, when he activated me last year to let people know exactly what was happening with the children above ground and underground, I created that website, and it was all his idea, and he named it, and he put the content there so that we, the people, could tackle this problem and eliminate it and put it behind us and help the little ones. I'm an independent LifeWave distributor. Live Younger with Lynne, LYNNE.com is that website. It is the wearable med bed. And I encourage people to reach out to me and ask if they have any questions, and I'm glad to help you. Um, Currently, it's being worn by RFK Jr., most of President Trump's cabinet. There are over, a matter of fact, RFK Jr. asked the inventor David Schmidt to be on the Make America Healthy Again committee. He declined because he has so many inventions he's creating for humanity. LifeWave has over 200 patents that talk about how the product in the patches, the Celergize, create stem cells. And it's extremely affordable and very effective. It turned my life, saved my life, decreased my PTSD and anxiety by 70%. Head to toe, I used to wear glasses. Now I don't. I used to have IBS. Now I don't. I used to have long COVID. Now I don't. I could just give many examples, but I encourage you to reach out to me. I'm going to check my cell phone. I think, okay, so Dr. Baker says that his computer is resetting now, his internet's resetting now, so we might be blessed to have him on for a few more minutes. Again, he is the co-author of Religion, Politics, and Polarization, as well as a book called The Optimist. And so we're talking about how faith is shaping political and legal decisions in the United States of America. Although he has lived worldwide, and he does have chapters in his books about political issues in other states. I know through LifeWave, I have several mothers in Europe who have been able to save their children. And so I've become very familiar with politics in Europe. And I'm telling you, folks, if you think we have it rough here, this is nothing compared to the systems in Europe that just snatch children straight out of the arms of their mothers and take their birth certificates in order to traffic them. And I could tell you many stories of that, as well as how LifeWave is helping these women to earn enough income to get out of the system, plus to help with their trauma and their little ones' trauma too. It's terrible what's going on over there. And those of you listening, I know we have an international audience. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give Dr. Baker another minute or so to get his internet up. And I think he's back. So let's get him back on the screen. Welcome back.
Hi.
Hi. You were
Oh,
speaking so much truth, they knocked you off the internet. I've had that happen several times with several guests.
wow. Well, I've never had that happen.
Really? That's telling.
It's yeah. Um, anyhow, we were talking about that over half the population doesn't pay any federal income tax. Now,
Yes.
most everybody pays payroll tax, which is your Social Security and your Medicare,
Yes.
if you have a paycheck. So, but there's no, as for the federal income tax, no, there's a lot of people who just don't, and this has been the case for a while. This is not a recent development.
I think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting that is the exact time when the internet went down. So I want to encourage everyone who's listening to share this show far and wide, because there is information clearly being presented that maybe some powers that be would not like that out. So I just want to encourage everyone, as well as to buy Dr. Baker's book, Religion, Politics, and Polarization. We do have a couple minutes. Thank you so much for holding up the book to our radio audience. He's holding up his book. And again, there's his other book, The Optimist. And They're available on, I saw it on Barnes and Noble, Amazon. I'm sure everywhere books are sold.
Yeah. Now, just a moment here about The Optimist. The Optimist is co-authored with my friend Ulf Sandström. He was a best-selling author in Sweden and Norway for many years, and it's about the power of positive thinking and how having an optimistic point of view can help you achieve your goals in life.
That is so true. And from a spiritual standpoint, what I'm sharing with everyone, with my background, I have a very supernatural life because when I was little, I would see God and Jesus and angels and demons all the time and go to heaven a lot, and I still do. And I understand the fact that in Genesis, God created everything, and he did it with words and thoughts because our words and our thoughts have frequency, they have creative power, and we are his children. And so what we think and what we say, when it goes into the spiritual realm, it has creative power. They're actually angels. I see them. Most people can't, but everyone has a bunch of angels and they're standing there waiting to be told what to do. So sometimes the things that we say, they're like, really? That's what you want? So just a side note of my background in the supernatural when it comes to the importance of optimism. And I remember you sharing a story with me, Dr. Baker, on the phone that had to do with President Trump and in this book. And yeah, tell me that story. We have probably 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, it's a fascinating element in the sense that, so Trump grew up in New York City, and his mother was a Scottish immigrant, and most Scottish people historically were Presbyterians. So Trump grew up going to a Presbyterian church in Manhattan, and the reverend of that church was the original author of the theory of the power of positive thinking. And so my friend Ulf Sandström for many years wrote about positive thinking, and he did not know. He did not know that until near the end of my co-author's life. He was hit and killed by a drunk driver a few years ago. Yeah. And so we actually published this book posthumous. We had the book. We had just finished the book about maybe 3 months before he died suddenly. He was hit by a car. But the fact that I think that, given that Trump went to church quite a bit as a young man, well into his teens, because his mother really emphasized that. And that was also a generation where church attendance was higher anyway. So the fact that he was exposed to this reverend over and over again, I'm very certain that Trump has utilized the power of positive thinking to sustain him in all the challenges that he's had. I read this, that he's had at least over 3,000 lawsuits.
Wow.
In the course of his lifetime. And he's constantly been sued and suing. There's a lot of conflict and has been. And we witnessed this as him being the president and then the former president and then president again. And so, but having a positive attitude and carrying that with you, positive thoughts, positive words, goes a long, long way. Words are kind of like viruses. Bad words can be.
Yes.
And you can, in many cases, you can turn your life around just by focusing on the positive. There are, happiness is something like your physical body. It has to be managed. And some people are naturally more physically healthy than others. Some people are naturally happier than others. So what we have in the Optimist is it's a method through repetition and through being very focused on what you want to accomplish. that's what the book is about. And it has a couple stories about people who've overcome obstacles. The book is written in a way that it appeals to people of all kinds of faiths for the most part. Ulf was a Lutheran, but he wanted his story to appeal to everybody, so it was written that way. And I think it is. Last year was people were really worried about the election, so there were a lot of people that really wanted to be positive. And now some people are much more positive this year than last year. You can look at the polls for that. But sustaining positivity is important. And there's a lot of things going on in the world right now that can bring us down. And, not just in the Middle East, but we have the war in Ukraine. We've got, all kinds of other issues. And so it's important to focus on what makes you happy and to really pursue that. So
I love this message. To me, it's gratitude and faith with action. Scripture talks about faith without action is dead. It's nothing. With my family's background, there was generational alcoholism on both sides, and that was a contributing factor to what one of many with what happened to me as a child, because my parents were responsible for me, and they failed. And alcoholism was a part of it, not the only part. But as an adult, in part of my healing, God would share, go to this place and do that, different ways to heal. One thing he told me to ask me to do was to go to Al-Anon, which is for friends and family of alcoholics. And he had me stay there for 5 years. And the number one recovery tool was the word gratitude. So everything that surpassed everything that was ever taught on the Al-Anon side was gratitude. And to be grateful for what you have, and don't look at what you don't, but grateful for what you have. And what that does is it creates chemical reactions in the body and gets the mind focusing on the positive. And I, to this day, you mentioned another thing I learned in Al-Anon was practice. Life is practice. So I'll have gratitude. I'll have it in my Bible study and prayer time every morning. It's always throughout Scripture. I'll have it posted around the house just to constantly remind and keep my mind there. And that does create a higher frequency. And if we, the people worldwide, would focus on gratitude, that defeats a lot of evil that in and of itself plus works. So it's not just being grateful, but it's taking out and connecting what you're grateful for to action on this earth to help out. Everybody has a part. You've mentioned several topics, and I'm so grateful during this hour that we've had. And we, the people, can each ask God, what is my part? What would you like me to do? And it might be, increasing your gardening to raise more organic produce to sell in your community. It doesn't have to be becoming a politician in DC. We all have gifts and talents. And when you start focusing on God's call for your life, your gratitude and your positivity just naturally increases because you're in his will.
Well, yeah. And also people struggle. They can lose sight of what matters to them. And one of the key points of the book, The Optimist, is prioritization. Sometimes people can get really hung up and get upset about something that may not be that important.
Right.
And
how important is it?
Yeah, and focusing on keeping that in mind. Fulfilling your goals. What you got 10 things you want to do in a day. What are your top 3? And then you also have to think, well, what can you get it done? So we live in a very complicated world, more so than ever because of constant communication and things changing and a lot of instability. And I think a lot of your listeners, you think about job security, relationship security. It's difficult when things that maybe going great one day may not be so great the next. And so what the optimist tries to do is it shows you a method where you can focus on what's important. And when you have those bumps in your life, by applying the method, you'll be able to stay on track and obtain what you hope to achieve.
Well, I love those thoughts. And I think that that is an excellent way to end our show, with positivity and hope and optimism for today and tomorrow. And God bless you for being on today. And please share again your books. And do you have a website or social media too, Dr. Baker?
Well, the best way to do this is just, this is the optimist here.
Okay.
Ulf Sandstrom.
Okay.
And then my other book is Religion, Politics, and Polarization. And you can just type in religion and politics. And then the best place to find that would be actually just with Amazon. Both of these books are sold on Amazon. So
okay.
Can go there and I really believe the Optimist book will help a lot of people. The Religion and Politics and Polarization book will give you a very good idea of the roots of the conflict that we're seeing right now in Washington.
Well, I agree. And thank you so much again for being on the show. For the audience, ways you can get a hold of me, qgrit.org. The letter Q is in quantum, because God is going after this child trafficking problem in a quantum way. qgrit, GRIT.org. God named it after that John Wayne movie, True Grit, where the little girl goes after the bad guys. That resonates with me quite a bit. And then I also have my LifeWave website. I'm an independent distributor. It is the wearable medbed. Live Younger with Lynne, LYNNE.com. Live Younger with Lynne, LYNNE.com. And if you're interested in my day job, my international human resource consulting, that's at LynneHaggerman.com. And Haggerman is Haggerman. And thank you again. We have thousands of people watching. Thank you, everyone in the chat. I've been watching your comments. I love the fact that the majority of them were that you were sharing the show, because when someone's internet goes down, I have known in the past year doing podcasts, especially paying attention to what was being discussed when it went down, which was actually taxation, although the entire show is important with what was being shared. So so I love the fact that the audience in chat is sharing this message, because internet going down is significant. And I want to encourage everyone, God bless. And until next time, Godspeed to us all.
Light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all. Lynne Scott Haggerman bringing the fire. Words that ignite hearts burning higher. Faith and power, no chains can bind. Step into the light, leave fear behind.